Guys, thanks again for tuning in to another installment of the Through the Bible series here at Calvary St. Joe. I'm Chuck Rhein, and we're finding ourselves in the book of Esther today, which is a great book. We will look at chapter 1, and in the New King James translation, begin in verse 7 with a little background. So, the book of Esther, there is a king, and he had a title kind of like Caesar in history. Wasn't really his name. Actually, his name was Xerxes, but he's called Ahasuerus here in Esther as a title. And what he's doing is he's setting up this huge military conquest against Greece. And so in order to do that, he's setting up parties, and he's going to party like crazy, like it's 1999, I think. And so what happens is that God's will is able to come in despite man's sinful activity that we see here in chapter 1, beginning in verse 7. There were at least three components, or three feast phases, if you will. And so verse 7 says, "And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king." And then verse 10, Esther 1, "On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded them to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold." So in the middle of this party, Xerxes will order his wife, Vashti, whose name means beautiful, at the very least, to unveil her face, which would have been taboo in that culture. And more than likely, it was more than that facial veil. And apparently, she wasn't just physically beautiful, but rather a woman with a certain degree of respect. And so in that situation, an old saying comes to mind that when wine enters, wisdom exits. And it just makes me wonder how many stories would be different, would have changed over the course of time, had men and women not gotten involved with alcohol and then finding themselves afterwards regretting situations. And we certainly see that in the New Testament with King Herod, and he had Herodias dancing, and it ended up with the consequence of the sin, because we know sin leads to death. And this ended up equaling the death of John the Baptist on a platter. So what happens here is that it ends up setting the stage here for a new queen to be selected for the king. And that's where Esther, the main character, comes in. And she's a Jew to intercede for her people. And what it does is it illustrates the principle that character matters. The word integrity has at its root word integer, and that means a whole number. And so the beauty that resides on the inside of a person is what really matters. You know, over time, our looks are going to fade. You know, we see that with our wonderful pandemic haircuts. And so these tents are becoming worn out, and what people are going to have to show for their life has everything to do with what's on the inside and the character and the integrity of that person. So it is interesting to note that Esther is one of the two books of the Bible that doesn't have the name God in it. In fact, in Esther, there's no reference to heaven or hell or prayer. And the book chronologically takes place in between Ezra and Nehemiah. And what had happened, well, here's a question you might ask. Was God not on the scene at this time? I don't think so. I think, if anything, it points to how faithful our Father is when we ourselves are faithless. And even when we relegate him to the backstage in our lives, he's still there. He's behind the scenes, and he's promising to never leave nor forsake us. And so the reason that we have the book of Esther is we see the perseverance of God. And even when you and I get to that point where we're disgusted maybe with our week or our month, or God shines the light of his word in an area that needs correction, we're thankful. And where would we be without our loving Father? So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.